Today I'm going to show you how to make Annie. Annie is a fantastically big, comfortable, roomy, zoomy in beach bag. I don't know why I said zoomy in. I think because we can zoom inside and have a look. It's very, very roomy. It's got a massive bottom on it, so it'll sit flat. Once you've got all your bits and bobs in it for the beach, it'll sit nice and flat. It has one zipped compartment in here, so that's a zipped pocket compartment. You can put two in if you want, but I'm just demonstrating putting the one in. And of course, you know, that's for putting your valuables in. So although some of us like to have a secured top, all I would say is if you have it open, you can put more stuff in it. I'm thinking you're going to put beach towels in here and swimming costumes and maybe the odd bit of food, that sort of thing. And all your valuables can go in the zippy pocket, which is enclosed here. Now, in actual fact, it's almost invisible because it's in the seam. The one thing we've done with this bag is to take the front over to the back. Let me show you this side because this shows the houses perfectly. It lined up beautifully. So we take most of the front, I don't know if you see, about 3 inches of the front over into the lining. So you've got that continuity, but it also allowed me to put a zip in there and a pocket, so you can put, like I said, your valuables and your bits and bobs in there, your phone, all your, you know, all your paraphernalia. It's got webbing handles, so it's nice and comfy. It's always nice and squidgy when you use a piece of webbing. You can make your own if you want to. All the measurements are in the pattern. You don't have to guess. On the first example I made, which is this one here, that is actually made out of curtaining fabric. I just loved the curtaining fabric when I saw it, and I thought, that would make a great beach bag. So that was my first sort of trial run, and actually I put rivets on the handles there, and obviously that is a option that you can do if you wish. It's stitched on like this, but then the rivets are put on purely as decoration, really. It doesn't need to have that extra strength, not really, unless you're going to carry 10 pounds of potatoes in here, in which case maybe it does. Yeah, so it's a lovely big roomy comfy bag. It's got double layer wadding, double layer batting. I've used 80/20. You might want to use in our form, you know, the foam interfacing if you wish. There's never any rules about what you can use. When I write the pattern, I always write what I use, but you can change it. You have my permission. So you could just use a regular medium weight stabilizer if you wish. I don't think it would handle quite so well because we've quilted all of this. I don't know if you can see that, but all of this is quilted, and that's the first thing practically we do. And that adds to the sort of dimension and texture of it. So that is Annie, and that is our beach bag for August 2022. The second project I'm actually wearing. We're actually going to be making a fabulous polyester voile top, a sort of wrap, sort of a cover up for the beach. Anyway, I'm wearing this. This is my original from about 3 years ago that I designed for a magazine. Never did go to print. The magazine, not this. So I thought I'd revive it, and in the next video that you'll see alongside this beach theme will be the fabulous top. It's so easy to make. Anyway, there we are. That is Annie. She's glorious, isn't she? I'm going to pop her over here. She can keep me company on my desk. That's it. I should have stuffed her with something. So obviously all the measurements are in the pattern. There's no guesswork. Everything is done there for you. You don't have to worry about lack of information. It's all there. I've got some lovely stripy fabric for the lining, and this is all done in one piece. So this is your lining, and the same applies for the outer. So it's not two pieces, rectangles, you know, squares, whatever we put together. It's one long piece. And you'll find with quilting cotton, it's actually the width pretty much of the quilting cotton. Again, all the measurements are in there. So I need to talk to you about what I've done so far. So if we look overhead, this is my gorgeous fabric. Isn't it delightful? We'll lose some of this in the boxy bottom, but I don't mind. And what we need to do first of all is to attach a really strong stabilizer. Now I've used Visaline S80, which in old currency, if you like, was the Pelmet Vilene, and some places still call it Pelmet Vilene. You could use Decavil, and not Decavil Soft or Light. You want the Decavil Original, because you want some stability here. In order for the top of the bag to remain nice and shaped, it was important to me to have this as your band, and that actually goes inside the bag, so eventually it'll go in here. And because it's a lovely stiff stabilizer, it actually gives you this fantastic sort of ridge already, this fold already of where we're going to fold over in the bag. Obviously we need to add wadding. So the first thing you're going to do is to stick this down and really make a good job of it. I've got a massive industrial press hot iron thingy that I clamp into, and that's the only thing that will actually really get this adhered. But a domestic iron with patience will get this stuck in no time at all. But you're going through, it's quite a thick, dense sort of stabilizer really, as is Decavil, so you want to just give it a bit of time. I also find that if you spray it with Best Press or just even a water spray, not too much, will help. The steam will help set the glue, and then leave it overnight. Anytime that you're using a stabilizer as strong as this, my best advice is to leave it overnight and to let it rest. So in other words, we're heating up the glue and then we need to cool it down to set, and that will only happen after a few hours. So that's our big piece. So you can see it's massive. It's a massive piece of fabric. So it's quite cumbersome to deal with, but so worth it. So the next thing we need to do is to attach the wadding. Now, in the pattern, I tell you exactly the size that you need to cut. You need to cut 2 layers of wadding. So here I've got mine already rolled up to go onto my project. I've pinned it there because I know that's the first bit I want to do. And you can see I've got it layered. Oh yeah, you can see I've got it 2 layers, and I've already glue basted these layers together. Gives you a kind of fighting chance to keep everything together. You need, and in the pattern it shows you, on at least one long side, you need the perfect straight edge, because you need that straight edge to butt up to your stiff stabilizer. I'll show you. But you need that straight edge to be perfect. So you need to use your rotary cutter, your ruler, your cutting mat to get that perfect straight line. And I really suggest you cut the 2 layers at the same time. Wadding has a habit, especially, well, any wadding really, especially, I'm going to say especially this 80-20, but a lot of natural wadding will move. It stretches. It's only condensed fibre, so it's going to move around a bit. So be careful with your handling. It will stretch. So there you can see we have the perfect straight line here. Now on this side, yes, I've got a perfect straight line, but by the time I've glue basted this on, it may well have shifted a little bit. So bear that in mind. Cut yourself a little bit of slack when you're doing this. Allow for maybe a little bit of trimming after you've adhered it on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to glue my wadding, my batting, onto my fabric. I've got it rolled up so I can do a little piece at a time. And I really think that's the best suggestion I can give you. Just do a little bit at a time. So if we look on the overhead now, and I'm going to stand up to do this, I'm going to get my spray glue in ready. And you can use 505 as long as it's a fabric stabilizer. So you can see on the overhead that we're not far off. Okay, you want to leave a ½ an inch here and here. I would say I probably have to trim this back a little bit more, but what you want to do is to get this edge absolutely lined up with this edge. Okay, so it just means that it's going to butt up, and our first row of stitching will hold that down so it's beautifully stitched. So I'll take my pin out because I know that was where I just wanted that for kind of like a reference. So I'm going to stick the first piece down, and I'm going to line it up as best I can. And like I say, this will stretch, so and it just kind of has its own life. If you wanted to, you could leave it a lot bigger, not this side, but a lot bigger on the 3 other sides, and then trim it back with your scissors maybe. You don't have to be so precise. So then all I'm going to do is spread out my outer bag piece. I'm going to roll that back, keeping everything lovely and straight, and just a little bit of glue, and then we're rolling it back. It's almost like you're kind of turfing the back lawn, the backyard, and you're just rolling it back, trying to keep that. This is key. Whatever you do here, we can adjust. Here we want it to be perfect first time, so we don't keep lifting it. So once you've glued it, we can just move that along the desk. I'll just put a little bit of glue on that bit. And you're gluing, you're basting this, you're not basting that, because the chances are it'll show. It may stain. We don't want that. So you're just rolling your wadding along, spraying as you go. You put on as much or as little as you think you need. It's one of those things where you get to know what glue you use and how much glue you need. So just keep going, just keep rolling that back. I was just touching it there to see where the glue was. Normally if you're making a quilt, you always make the wadding a lot bigger, so you can trim back, and it also allows for movement when you're quilting. Well, because we're making a bag, there's certain things about this that needs to be precise. You don't need much spray, but you need it to hold fast while you're stitching. So coming right down to the bottom there, you can see. Now I deliberately left this long. You can see this is my, let's call it my scruffy edge, because I deliberately kept that long. I didn't want to cut that, although I give you the measurements, I didn't want to cut that precisely, just in case I needed a little bit more wadding just on that end bit there. So I've stuck it down. That's all absolutely gorgeous. But I want to cut this away, so even though I've got the glue on there, glued it to my desk, let's turn it around, and I'm just going to follow that line. I mean, to be honest, you could pull it back. There we go. And just follow that line. This is probably a good time to use your big scissors. If you go slightly off, don't worry. If you're a little bit too long, you can always trim back again. The main thing is that we keep our seams fairly clear of wadding. So you can see I'm just literally hand cutting this away. That's not too bad. We've got a bit of a wonky line there, but let's just leave it like that. See, what we can do is you just move your hand and you can shift it. It's amazing what you can do with wadding. So there we are. So there's the whole piece now with the wadding on. So if I hold that up, you can see what it looks like. And to be honest, it gives a little bit more structure. A double layer will give a little bit more structure. And it allows for that effect of quilting the strips, and it makes it a little bit more puffy, a little bit more dimensional. So the next thing we need to do is to quilt it. Now, on my machine, I'll just bring my machine in. There we go. Oops. It's got a life of its own, this machine. There we go. Let's get it on the mat properly. So on my machine, you can see here, I have my walking foot, almost essential because we're using so many layers. I've also got my quilter's guide here, Let me just move my pincushion so you can see better. So I've got my quilting guide here, and I've got it set at 3/4 of an inch. Now you could do less, you can do more. I would say if you're going to do anything, do more, because if you do like a 1/2 an inch, which will look lovely, you've got such you've got to have that accuracy, and you don't want to go down to the bottom of the bag and your lines are a bit sort of, you know, skew width, let's say. So 3/4 of an inch I always find to be quite a nice width. If I bring in the bag here to show you, you can see what that looks like now, really nicely close up. Isn't that gorgeous? I could be there. But you can see that it's a nice width, and you can see it really gives it dimension and brings the whole scene to life, especially if you're using fabulous fabrics like this. So literally you're now following the lines. So the first line you're going to do, and this will take a little while, so I will do the first little bit and then I'll come back and when it's done. So I'm increasing my stitch length. Now if you were hand quilting, I'd say you want the tiniest stitch ever, because that's what hand quilting is all about. But we're not hand quilting, we're machine quilting, and we want it to be a statement. We want it to show, we want it to look purposeful, I suppose. So the first line of stitching we're going to do is fairly close to this edge of the wadding. We're not going on to the stiff stabilizer, we're stitching right on the edge of this. So if I just go along there, if you find as you're going along your wadding has moved or it's off a little bit, just push it back on to where you want it to be. It's very forgiving, wadding, but you need to be in charge of it. Don't let it be in charge of you. So just take your time. This is a large piece to do all this work on, and this is really the longest piece of making this bag up. The pocket takes a little while, but the quilting takes the longest. I would say give yourself at least 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how fast you stitch. So we're just going along here, and then I'll show you what I've done. So at the moment my guide means nothing. It's not doing anything other than looking pretty. So I'm just carrying on, and all the time I'm adjusting because it's such a large piece. It kind of doesn't want to move that much. So I'm adjusting just to make sure it's keeping straight. So this first one really is crucial because it's actually stitching down the wadding. It's kind of anchoring this down because this is where you're going to turn. Okay, now it doesn't matter that we haven't lined this up. This is all going into the seam. So there we are. If I show you that, you'll see that I've just literally kissed the edge of that wadding. If I bring it up a little bit more, you'll see I've literally just kissed that edge along there, and that's to anchor it down. And then what you've got is the most marvelous stitching on the front, a really nice neat edge. Now what you're going to do is flip this over to the front. So we're going to flip the whole thing round, and you're now stitching from the front, because the front is more important than what you're seeing on the wadding. The wadding might send your eyes crazy, whereas with this you're now going to be stitching on the front, so you can see exactly what it looks like. And I want you to see now that my quilting guide is following my line of stitching, and what I suggest you do is not look at this, but look at this. This is the important bit. The quilting guide is the important bit, that not so much. So you need to follow that, and as long as your first line is beautifully straight, and do check it, do make sure that you know you're happy with it. You're just literally following that line down. Another suggestion, when you've put your wadding on, when you've attached your wadding, give this whole thing a press. The heat will help the glue, and it'll also make the 2 layers really super neat. If you're using the iron-on foam stabiliser, the inner foam, Bosal inner foam, or whatever it is in your neck of the woods, then you wouldn't need to do that. You wouldn't need to worry. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go right up the top again and do the next line. But what I'm going to do is I'll start off, and then you can see, look at that, it's absolutely gorgeous. And that big stitch really, really helps, you know, the effect, the dimension of it. And on the back, that's how it looks. Obviously we're going to end up with lots and lots of lines, but all we're going to do now is just feed it back up to the top. Start near the raw edge, so all your threads and workings, if you like, your raw ends, your little bits that you have when you start and stop stitching, are going to be encapsulated into the side seam then when we stitch it. So again, you're just literally going to follow that line. Keep an eye on it, make sure that it's straight. Don't go too fast, don't be tempted. It could easily run away with you, and you'll be so annoyed because this is what you're going to see. Okay, so you get the gist of it now. I've got all of this to do, which I'll do now, and then I'll come back to you. It'll take maybe 30 minutes or so. You won't know that. You'll just see the next bit. So now we're going to put the bag handles on. So I've already made my marks. It gives you full details of where to place these straps in the instructions. There's pictures and there's all the right words and measurements there for you. But just to save a bit of time, I've done all the preliminary measuring. All I'm going to do is show you how to place the handles. Now I've got the fabric on my desk upside down. So this is the top of the bag and this is obviously the bottom of the bag here. So that's how I like to show you, because we need the bag handles to sit like that. That's how we want them to be. So the loop of the handle is up the top here. If I was to bring that in, and then you can see I'm going to slide it back. The one thing you want to make sure of is that it's not twisted. So what I've done is I've marked my measurements here. So if I just make those a little bit bigger, perhaps you can see. And it gives you clear instructions on how far that is from the side and how far that is down onto your bag. So you've got to turn these over so they're nice and neat, or you could zigzag the end of these almost like a satin stitch to get this really neat, because this frays quite a bit. But in all honesty, and I'm sure your domestic machines will go through 2 layers of webbing. It's a really lovely soft cotton webbing. So I'm going to turn it, I'm going to place it there. Now the great thing about doing all this quilting is that you've got a line to follow. So if all of your bag handles are following the same depth away from your quilting, as I don't know if you can see, there's my quilting line. I'm going to make sure that they sit nicely the same all the way along. And of course, if you want to, you can bring it down and line it up with your quilting so you know that's absolutely square on, but we'll keep it as it is. So you've got your bag handles going correctly. I'll move this along in a second so you can see the top. And then all I'm going to do is put a pin in. I'm not going to put a pin in where the fold is, because that's too thick for my pins, to be honest. But it's fine, you can't use a clip, so a pin is the best option. You're also going to put your webbing on the left hand side of your mark here and on the right hand side of your mark here. So the distance between that one and that one stays exactly as it was. So you're not going to put it on the right hand side on both. You're putting it on the left on this one and the right on that one. Again, I'm going to line it up and pin it just so it is sitting in the right place. And I'm not too worried that my fold is coming undone. There we are, because when I get to it I can always tuck it under. I can use my stiletto tool to hold everything in place as I'm stitching. Okay, so we can move this along. So let me show you what that looks like. And this is obviously the top of the bag. And then when we fold this under with the lining, that's how it'll sit. So it's going to look really neat, and it's a nice long handle. It'll go over your shoulder with all your bits and bobs. So let's unfold it. Just move our piece across. You can see it's a really large piece of work, but it's very manageable. It's not too difficult. Okay, I'll get my pins at the ready. Now let's put the other piece on. So once again, we're going to fold that end under, and it's the folded end that I'm putting. So let me just make those marks a bit bigger for you so you can see. And again, we're just going to use our quilting line as a guide to keep them straight. So again, just popping that down there. This one is on the right of the mark. So don't forget, I've got the top of the bag here. This is not the bottom of the bag. So I'm kind of working upside down, but it's just easier for you to see this way round. So there we are. So when I get to the machine, I can tuck that under beautifully. And don't forget, you can use coloured webbing if you want to, or you can make your own. I would do a 4-inch width and then fold it a couple of times to get your strap. We've done that a few times, so you should be okay with that. Again, I'm lining that up. I nearly did that wrong. So this one's to the right of the mark, this one's to the left of the mark. There we go. And we're just going to pin it. This side seam here, let me just move this. This short edged side seam is actually going to be at the side of the bag. So if I show you on the front camera, if we fold this in half, it's always good to get a visual. That's how it will be. Okay, so your bag handle placement is now perfect. You can see it's perfectly lined up, and it allows for that 1/2-inch seam allowance. And you can always adjust this if you're looking at this and you think, oh, I'm not sure, you know, I need them to be wider or nearer together, then please adjust. So we're just going to pop this under the machine now. I've changed my foot from a walking foot to just my regular, actually it's my little zipper foot, which I love to use. It's a lovely little foot, it really is. But just your regular foot is fine. Oh, so let's just bring it in. Gosh, sometimes this is an awkward machine. Sometimes it's not. Okay, so obviously I would put the smallest amount of fabric now under your needle, but you're going to twist and turn this around, and it's all, like I said before, quite a lot of fabric to manipulate. Okay, so I'll do one and then I'll go away and do the others. So I'm going to start on the folded edge. I'm going to start so it's about, I suppose it's about, it's a 1/4 inch away from my quilted line, but quite honestly your lines will be different to mine perhaps. So if you want to, go back again and do a second line. So we're going to do a little box. So I've gone all the way along the webbing, and now I'm coming up about, I suppose about a 1/2 inch. Turn your work again, and this is where I want to trim. So I'm going to, let's move it so you can see a little better. So I'm going to trim my thread there. I'm going to just, there's a few little raw sort of threads there that I can trim away, and also I can use my stiletto to hold all this in place while I stitch. And if you've got any if you've got any frayed pieces, try and tuck those in so you don't see them. And this is why a nice zigzag stitch is great, because it solves all the problem of frayed edges. So come down and then come down the other side. And like I say, you just want to make sure that everything is lined up. Those frayed little edges stay in. And if they don't, you can always trim it off afterwards. So again, now if you want to do you know, the crisscross going through the rectangle, the box, then you can. Mine's a little wonky, but I'm sure you'll forgive me for that. So that's that strap attached. So now you just want to work your way along the bag, attaching all the other straps. So now we've attached our handles, so we know we're good to go with those. And obviously at this stage, if you want to add rivets for decoration, then this is the time to do it. So what we need to do now is to join our lining to our outer piece. So it's literally right sides together. Be thinking about directional fabric on your lining if you need to. With this stripe, obviously I don't need to. Whatever directional fabric you use on the outer, as you turn it under, it'll be upside down. So just bear that in mind. If it's something really, really obvious, maybe that's something you don't want to have. But I've only just got triangles on mine, so it's not going to make any difference. So we're literally going to do right sides together. And we're just going to stitch this down. Now a nice half an inch. A half an inch is fine. Obviously you can clip the two layers together just to help you, pin if you need to, but just put all the layers together. As I say, it's such a big piece. Oh, it would help if I didn't pin all of the layers. So keep your bag handles out of the way. There we are. That's better. So all the way along, right sides together, just give it a little clip, and then as you come to the end, obviously you can pop a little clip in there as well. So a good half-inch seam allowance. This is important that you stick to the half an inch because we're going to put a pocket in that seam, so you want to make sure you've got enough room for the zip and the pocket to fit. So let's just move everything in. Okay, so starting at the top, right sides together, and we're just going to go all the way down. I'm going to do a little back stitch just to hold. When we've stitched this seam, we're going to press our seam open. So I've ironed that seam open, so it looks like that. So you can see that it's a nice flat seam now with it open. So a good half-inch seam allowance will make a huge difference now because we're going to put the zip in with the pocket. So the first thing you need to do is to get your pocket piece. You want right sides facing up, so I'll show you on the side there. It's not easy to see the right and wrong of this fabric on camera, but this is the right side. You're taking the right side of your zip facing you like that. You've marked a half an inch in on this end and on that end. So if I show you, you can see where my marks are, and we're going to attach the zip just on the side of the fabric. So we're not trying to sort of install the zip now. All we're doing is putting the two pieces together. It's easier to work with. So lining up the edge of the zipper tape and the edge of your fabric, I'm going to stitch, I suppose it's about 1/8 of an inch all the way along. Because I'm using my little zipper foot, my zipper slider shouldn't really get in my way, but obviously if it does, we can just move it. And all the way to the end. So we've just attached one edge of the zip to our right side of our pocket fabric. So now we're going to make sure that our zip is in the right place. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. In the pattern, it gives you the exact measurements that you need to make to ensure that your pocket sits between the bag handles. That's what we're aiming for. So if we look on the overhead, I've marked in from this side in, and it gives you that first measurement, and then it asks you to make another mark of a half an inch, and actually that's where our stitch line's going to end for our zip. okay, but from that line here we need to put a piece of quilter's tape to hold our zip in place. So I'm just literally going to put it on my lining here, my lining, all the way along on the outside edge, pretty much. That's just shifted, of course it would. I'll leave it there because it's glued down. So it's on the outside edge of my seam. You can see it there. It's a certain length of quilter's tape to make sure that your zip is sitting in the right place. But you don't want to stick any quilter's tape on this 1/2 inch. So each end will have a 1/2 inch. And this is the only section here that we're stitching initially. So take your piece that you've just stitched. So there's our piece, and you can see that our marks now line up. So the end of your tape sort of corresponds with the marks that you've already made on there. So all we're going to do is literally peel this away, and we're going to stick our zip down in place. So I'm just going to flip this over. So it's obviously right side of your zip down. I'll just flip it over, and I'm just going to stick that in place. So the edge of my fabric goes to that first line there. And I'm just going to follow all the way down. Now if you want to, you can pin. You don't have to use quilter's tape, but it is incredibly handy. Right, so let's just do a quick recap. I marked in, and then I marked again a 1/2 inch. I put my quilter's tape from that 1/2 inch all the way along there, and you get the measurement for the quilter's tape. I then place the right hand side, or the right side of my fabric and my zip down onto my seam. You can see this is the wrong side. There's my stiffening, there's my lining. So that's now stuck down. What I want you to do is to flip this all over, and I want you to stitch from the front, because that will give you a really neat finish. You'll understand why. Now if you're not confident about this quilter's tape and you think it's going to move, then by all means pop a pin in. Now I don't want you to stitch anywhere near this pin. This pin is going to be on the side that you're not even going to see, but you'll see the edge of the pin. You'll see that silver, the pin if you like, coming through on the other side. So you could do that, but this quilter's tape should hold it in place. We're going to stitch the first line, so we're only going to stitch from, well, it'll be from here. I'm just thinking which is better for me, from here to there, but just on that where the tape is. We're going to finish a 1/2 inch from the end there. So when you flip this over, you might want to make a second mark. So in other words, let's just do that. So where we've got the zip in position here now, let's just try and get that in so you can see. Our zip is lying, let's just make sure it is there still. Our zip is lying in between our pins here. And if I just pin that so it comes through, there we go, I've got my silver line now. And so we're going to stitch from there about a 1/2 inch in, so we could make a mark all the way along to the other end, and you do have measurements for that to allow you to stitch correctly. And all you're going to do is one line of stitching all the way along there, okay, to that mark. The pin is really at the edge of the zip, so we don't want to stitch from there, we want to stitch from there. Now you might find that your slider is in the way, so by all means pop your hand inside and move that slider so it's more comfortable for you as you go along. But all we're doing is stitching from there to there. So find that 1/2 inch mark. I'm going to do just one back stitch, and obviously you want to measure the other side, make sure you're only stitching where the zip is. So you could use your marker now. I've got it there already, that's fine. So I'm going to move my slider in a minute. So you really want to be aiming for about 1/4 inch from the seam line out. I'll show you when I've done. I'm going to get my hand in there ready to move the slider. Let's see. So I'm going to lift my foot up and just move that slider along. Now be careful, because you've got an open end of zip. You haven't, you know, it's not, you haven't got a stopper there. So be careful, don't move it too far. It is all stuck, so we're fine. So I'm just coming to the end. One back stitch only, because this is what you're going to see, so you don't want it to be untidy. So if we look on the camera here, I'm going to turn my stitch length down a little bit. I'm still on quilting length of stitch, I think. I've actually stitched down here and I've just stopped there. You can just see. So I've got my half of my zip installed all the way down there. Okay, so let's just flip that back again. Okay, so now we can see what we've done. We've got a pin in there somewhere. Oh no, we've caught the zip. That's it. So I'm going to take my marker pins out. I don't need those anymore. So you can see what that looks like. So we've literally stitched from there down to here. So now we've stitched that in place. You can see on the overhead here we've stitched from here to here, and our zip is obviously underneath. Try and get your zipper teeth to follow the line of the seam. It's not desperately crucial, but it might be when you're trying to catch the fabric. So now what we're going to do is that we're going to bring this pocket piece over. So this is what it looks like. Okay, so now we've got the right side of our fabric showing. This is the right side of my pocket. There. And we've just flipped it over. So I'll do that again. That's where we stitched. And now we're going to flip that over. And if you want to, I'm finger pressing, but if you wanted to, you could pop the iron on there to make it super neat. So now what we need to do is to bring that side up. So the other short end, you're bringing up to match the edge of your zipper slider here. Sorry, your zipper tape. And we're going to stitch these sides. Okay, so if I was to just clip that together, because we've left that 1/2 inch free on the end of the zipper tape, you can see it allows me to lift up and I can stitch from there to there. Now the thing is, you'll need to take all of this bag away in order to do that. So you're going to flip the whole bag underneath. The same on this end. Now with this end you've got to be careful because you've got an open end to your zip there. If you wanted to, you could just stitch that together with a bit of a hand stitch, or pop it under the machine just to join that end together. So just be cautious of that. What I'll do is I'll put a clip in there to hold all those layers together. But just be aware of that as you're stitching, but a nice little hand stitch will help. So that's what the pocket looks like now. So all we're going to do is we're going to stitch from there down to the fold, and from there down to the fold, and then we'll complete our letterbox zipper opening when we've completed this bit. So of course, like I said, you've got to get all of this bag out of the way so you can get to that seam. So keep it as it was. so the upper part of your clip is showing, because your quilting clips have a flat side and a domed side. So if you always keep the domed pretty colour side facing up, you know that's the side you're always going to be stitching. So again, 1/2 inch, I'm tucking the whole bag under. I've gone from the fold up, but you can go from the top down. It's just how I had it on my desk. So just be cautious of this end part where the zipper teeth are not touching. Just try and make sure that you get them to touch. You're doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So there's one side stitched down there. So I'm just going to flip it round, fold all this bag under again. This isn't difficult. I suppose if anything it's just awkward with all the layers. So again, 1/2 inch all the way down. Make sure all your fabric's out of the way that you don't want to stitch. Okay, so let's have a look on the overhead. Okay, I don't know what's bag and what's not. Okay, so that's what it looks like. You've stitched from there to there and there to there. Now what we need to do is to flip the whole thing over, and we need to stitch the front of this. Now none of this is attached, and if you want to use quilter's tape to hold all this down, please do. We don't really want to put pins in this side. We did initially, only because if you're not confident that your quilter's tape is going to hold it securely enough, then by all means you know, you can use the pins to help you. You might want to just make sure that your pocket is sort of kissing the edge of your zipper tape, so you might want to put some quilter's tape along there just to make sure it's holding. Let's do that. There we are. I was looking for my tape. And of course you can do this before you stitch it, it might be easier. But I'll just put a little piece in. It needs to go back in the bag. And once again, we've got the zip slider to contend with, but I'm just going to show you something before we stitch. So I'm putting my quilter's tape all the way down. Just to hold everything, but it's just a handy thing to have because it holds your layers for you, and because we're going to flip this over, we won't know if we've caught the pocket lining or not. We're just going to hope that that it does, but actual fact this is far more accurate. So that's all now attached. So what we're going to do is just flip this over to the right side. And here is our seam, and our zip is hiding underneath there, so we need to actually open this seam up now to see our zip. It will help. You can stitch without, you can stitch it while it's still closed, but because of the zip slider you can stitch some of it when it's closed, and then you can open it up as you go along. And a seam ripper is good for this. I'm just using what I've got to hand, which are these lovely sharp little viscose scissors. So I'm just chopping away. Obviously you want to get rid of all these little bits and bobs, these little bits of stitching. That's it. So underneath there is our zip. Can you see? There's our zip slider here. So at least you've got a visual on that, and it allows you to move this slider in and out of the way. So now what you can do is you could do the same seam allowance all the way along, 1/4 inch, or if your seam is really generous, you could go up and do a bit more of a decorative finish. So we're going to actually start stitching from here. We're going across the end here to secure. We're coming along. Make sure your edges sit together. This is why sometimes it's better to cut afterwards, that seam. And then we're going to come all the way along here and come up to finish. So bring the machine in again. Feeding it under the needle. So much going on. Okay. So just make sure everything is lying flat, that your pocket is flat. Your zip is flat, everything is lying exactly where you want it. Put your foot down. Now I don't think you're going to see anything of this. So all I'm doing is starting where I stopped stitching before. I'm going to do a little back stitch so it's nice and strong. I'm coming across my zip and I'm going to do about 1/4 inch like I did before. Turning all my work and then just stitching that seam. Now your zipper foot will follow the edge of the teeth of the zip anyway, so you shouldn't have any troubles with this. And you've got all your layers stuck together basically. Once you get to the zip slider, lift up your presser foot and you can slide that out of the way. And then just carry on stitching. And then we're just turning and we're going to close off the end of that letterbox. Just make sure everything is flat underneath, that your pocket is still where it needs to be. Come across the zip, little back stitch just to secure, and then break your threads. Beautifully neat. If you've got any little bits where you've snipped or used your seam ripper, one of those lint rollers will help get all those bits and pieces out. So when we look now, if we move this out of the way and we look on the overhead, we've now installed that pocket really neatly. There's so much fabric going on. There we go. We've installed that pocket really neatly between our handles, and that sits absolutely perfectly. And then we can do it up and undo it, and then you've got the perfect pocket. And through there we are, there's our pocket in there. And that'll take all of your secure stuff like your phone, your purse, maybe a credit card, ice cream money. And then give it a good press so it's nice and neat. And that's it finished, just a little snip there, all done. So now it's just a case of making the bag up, which is now super easy. So all you're going to do is, let's just bring this together. So you're doing right sides together with your outer and your lining. And you're just going to pin those in place. We're going to cut our corners first. So marry up your top seam. Use pins, use clips. So you're putting the outer piece together that you've quilted what seems like ages ago now, and you're putting your lining pieces together. So in here we have our lining. Okay, So now we've got that looking like that, I want you to cut your corners. So I'll just demonstrate on one corner, and then we'll stitch it up from there. So let me take that one out. So trying to get it so you can see. Okay, so what I would do is use a heat erasable pen on your corners that are raw edges. So in other words, your side seams and your bottom seams, your measurements are going to be different to the other side. So just bear that in mind and look at the pattern. So I'm going to measure in and draw a line. Okay, so now that is the square that I'm going to cut out. On the other side that doesn't have a seam, the measurement is slightly different because you don't have a seam here. Got a pleat, could do with ironing that out. There we are. So it's going to be slightly different. So you're losing a ½ an inch difference on this side. So this is now a rectangle, whereas the other corner was a square. But all the measurements are in the pattern. So now if I were you, I would pin this to secure. I'd get your big scissors and I would just cut that away. You can use your rotary cutter, but you might just go into the fabric where you don't want to. In other words, just here. So if you pin it, it secures it. Again, pop a pin in and just cut those corners out. And you're going to repeat that on the other end where the wadding is. And in the pattern, there's a picture of what that looks like when that's done. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I have cut all my corners out. I'm just going to clip this together so I can hold it up for you. There's a picture of this in the pattern and that's what it looks like. Okay, so you've got your corners cut out. But what I want you to do is stitch along this short end bottom seam. I want you to stitch along the entire length of this long seam, and on your lining I want you to stitch all the way along but leave a turning gap, and we'll do that one first so we don't forget. So I would leave a turning gap of at least 5 inches. This is a big bag. So we'll do the turning gap in first, and we're still using a ½ inch seam allowance. So try and line up your raw edges. Stitch about 3 inches, cut your threads. Go to the other side, hop over, try and keep your raw edges together. So that's our short lining side done with a really decent turning gap. And then you're only stitching one long side because the other side obviously is folded. So let's pop that under the machine. Don't forget a ½ inch seam allowance. With all this bulk, it's much easier to have a ½ an inch. Try and get up as close as you can to your wadding. And then when you come to this top seam, try and get it so the seams are lying directly on top of each other. Okay, so that's the big long seam done, and now we need to do the short end of the outer. Again, just kiss that quilting, the wadding. So you're just using that 1/2 inch seam allowance again. If you catch some of the wadding, don't worry, this is going to go in the bottom of the bag, so it's not crucial. Okay, excellent. So now what we're going to do is we're going to box all of these bottoms. So you know how to do that. Just line up. It's easier to show you when we've got a seam. So we've got a seam here, we've got a seam here, and those two seams must meet, and then these points pull out. So we're nearly there. There's a little trick I want to show you in just a second. So again, 1/2 inch. If you want to open those seams up, you can. You've got quite a lot of layers going on here, because obviously our wadding hasn't been cut back at all. So be careful of your machine, be respectful. So again, we'll box this bottom, and then we'll go on to do the lining. So with the lining, same again, just pull out those points. This one, you're lining up the seams. I think I have my concentration face on. Okay, so that's all our corners boxed. Okay, that's what it should look like. But now what I want you to do, this is quite interesting. I want you to take your lining boxed bottom, which is this hand here, and your outer box bottom, and bring them together. So just push that out of the way and bring them together, and you're going to stitch them together. This will help the lining stay put. It's quite a nice little thing to do, and you can do this with anything. So we're going inside of our stitching. So our seam, well, our seam is probably about 1/4 inch. As long as you stay inside, again, you're using lots of layers. You're stitching lots of layers together. So don't go diagonally, go from the top together and the bottom together, and then the bag is made. So again, on the other side, this is the lining box bottom. This is my outer box bottom. Where? It's there somewhere. There we are. And we're just going to bring them together and stitch them together. So you don't want to twist anything. And then, like I say, the bag is made. Just got to turn it through. So all of those layers are now being caught. Okay, so let's turn it through. So you can see how that looks where we've caught the two corners together. It's a nice technique. You can do it with pouches and anything really. But now the hard part of getting all of that quilting and that batting through that gap, that's why you need to make sure that you've left a really decent turning gap, because there's a lot going on now. Okay. Let's get it so the right side is showing. Just push those corners out, that box bottom. Obviously you're going to stitch your turning gap closed. We'll do that later. Obviously it needs a really good press. It's been through the mill somewhat. You'll have a natural fold line where that really stiff stiffener is, and that is your bag made. So that is our second version, actually our third version of Annie. Needs a press, and that's what it looks like inside. And obviously we've got to stitch the gap, and you've got that fabulous pocket, so for all your secure items. So that is Annie. We've now got a couple of seaside versions of what she looks like, and the one at the back there. So I hope you enjoy making her. She's really dead easy, and actually I do hope to see loads.